Welcome to this session, Business Transition Plans Centered Around Mapping and Eliminating Fossil Fuels. And this is a session co-hosted by Exponential Roadmap Initiative and IKEA. And my name is Andrea Lindblom. I'm the head of communications at Exponential Roadmap Initiative. So we're into week 2 of COP, and the single biggest issue, of course, is what countries can commit to when it comes to phasing out fossil fuels. And the draft decision text has all options on the table. That's from full phase out to no text at all. And we know, of course, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, that to limit global warming to as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius, to a level of warming at which there is still a livable planet for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, that for that, the use of coal has to have gone down by 95% by 2050, and that's compared to 2019. The global use of oil down by 60%, and gas 45%. So that's the science, and yesterday we saw a very powerful letter from scientists and business and mayors calling for a COP outcome in line with this science. We'll talk today a bit about what business can do to act on the science and how they can center their transition plans around mapping and eliminating fossil fuels from operations and value chains. But before we do that, let's hear a personal account from a young woman from a small island developing state. Welcome, Excel Rodwell, from the Seychelles, Youth Climate Change Delegate. And maybe you can grab a mic. Thanks. Do we need to worry about turning this on? It's all done. Fantastic. So great that you're here, Excel.
Thank you for having me.
Don't worry, we can hear you. It's all good. So Seychelles is this beautiful island nation in the Indian Ocean. It has amazing beaches. It has beautiful coral reefs. It lives off its tourism and the fishing industry. How are you and your people already feeling and experiencing the impacts of climate change?
So like you've mentioned, when people talk about Seychelles, all they hear is beautiful beaches, exquisite nature. But on Thursday of the 7th, this Thursday, we were impacted by heavy rainfalls, which led to a landslide, and we lost 3 members of our community. It's devastating when we feel the full impact of climate change at a national level, and being away from home and fighting for what we're actually experiencing is something that we couldn't possibly imagine. The heavy rainfall is worrying right now in Seychelles, and we're not only affected by that, there's also increased sea level rise in my country. Our children are no longer able to attend schools because our infrastructures, our roads are blocked. And these basic needs that our people cannot access due to climate change is becoming alarming. And living on a small island, there's no other option than to take a step back and reevaluate what we're doing to fight climate change. We are talking about what young people want, and what we really need right now is for, as a world, as one community, to come together and fight climate change, because we're already experiencing these terrible, terrible impacts.
Now, you're pursuing a Master of Science in Climate Finance. You also work with the Ministry of Finance in your country. But although the emissions of the Seychelles are super small, both now and historically, you want your country to get rid of fossil fuels. Why?
There are several reasons, but the main one is we want to be leaders when it comes to climate change. So we cannot be telling other countries that you should stop emitting where we're heavily dependent on fossil fuel. We want to become leaders, and this is why we also want to help reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. And I think that as a small island, definitely this is possible for Seychelles, and this would not only, moving away from fossil fuel will not only help our climate, but also our economy.
But how would this work? Where do the fossil fuels, where do you need to phase them out, and what can come in instead?
Absolutely. The first thing we need to, our biggest emitters sectors in our country is the energy sector, which consists of electricity and transportation. So these are the main areas that we want to help reduce. And the best way to do so is to introduce renewable energy in our country, because we have access to the sun, we have access to wind, and as an island, these resources are the best way possible for us to move towards a net carbon zero. And one of the other aspects that we want to implement is carbon tax, which is necessary so that we can see, as a country, we can put the tax on carbon so that businesses be aware of what we're spending on, and tax those externalities so that in the long run, they also have that mindset to move towards sustainable resources, really.
Now, we're talking here in this event about the role of business in phasing out fossil fuels. What would be your call to action to the companies that are doing business in Seychelles on phasing out fossil fuels?
I think one of the reasons that shipping companies, these are the main shipping and aviators, are the main emitters as well. They're choosing Seychelles is because we don't have a carbon pricing system. And one of the things that I would recommend for businesses is to, just because we don't have a carbon pricing system doesn't mean that we're willing to let emissions not be cost. This might be a plan for the future, but we want businesses now to take the initiatives and push forward sustainable products and sustainable way of doing business in my country. Because at the end of the day, we're already facing these impacts. So voluntarily choosing to move towards sustainable products would help the country immensely. Yes.
Thank you so much, Excel, for this account and for coming. Please do take a seat in the audience if your time permits. I know that you are supporting your delegation in the negotiations and they're heating up, but if you have the time, please stay. Thank you. And no need to turn off the mic. I think that can stay like that. Thank you. And I'd now like to welcome our panelists, Christina Niemeyer-Ström, Global Head of Sustainability Supply and Strategic Sustainability Assignments, Inter-IKEA Group. Welcome. Johan Falk, CEO of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Joining us remotely is, thank you, yes, is David Ekelund, CEO of Icebug. He should be coming up on the screen. We have Andrew Prague, Managing Director of the We Mean Business Coalition. And we have Ali Sheridan, Director of Major Partnerships at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Probably the only initiative that has a longer name than that of Exponential Roadmap. Welcome to this session. So, business transition plans, net zero targets, phasing out fossil fuels. Christina, what is IKEA doing on net zero targets? So what targets do you have, and also what's the thinking there around fossil fuels?
We have just recently now aligned our goals with the net zero targets, which means that now we have a 30% reduction goal for 2030. And then we have a 90% reduction goal for 2050 latest, and that is through our value chain and without any carbon offsets. And then we have the remaining 10%, and that's where we go for remove and store in land, can be in forest or agriculture, or also in our furniture. And we are totally behind the full phase out of fossil fuel. So we will drastically reduce the emissions along our total value chain. That is our part.
how are you already working with fossil fuels then in achieving your net zero targets?
I mean, we of course then now know our fossil fuels, and we know the emissions that we have across the entire value chain. So we are focusing on 4 different parts here. I mentioned them shortly here. So first one is to go to 100% renewable energy and electrify the processes along this value chain, and also work with the constant energy efficiency projects. Secondly is to really work with the material. Material stands for over 50%. Material and food ingredients, 50% of the IKEA footprint. To secure that we in the product development put in new materials and also exchange those that are there today with better ones with lower climate footprint. Thirdly is to also involve our customers in this journey so that they can make sustainable choices when it comes to their life and how they want to live it, in reducing energy use, water, waste, and also to actually have a choice for them to choose more plant-based food. We know we have 600 million people coming to an IKEA store to have a meal, yearly. And then lastly, but absolutely not the least, is to transform to a fully circular business.
Thank you, Christina. And now over to David there in the background. So see us all turning around a little bit awkwardly. David, you at Icebug, and just for those that don't know Icebug, this is a Swedish outdoor food brand, excuse me. So, David, you've actually published not just developed, but also published your transition plan that is aligned with the recommendations of the UN Secretary General's high-level expert group, the HLEG. What targets are you communicating in that transition plan, and how are you specifically addressing fossil fuels?
Well, I think the most important is that things need to start happen immediately. So we very much focus on the first part, which is halving latest by 2030. And fossil fuels, I think what happened during making this climate transition plan was that we have a general direction of phasing out fossil fuels as fast as possible. But when we worked with the climate transition plan, it became a lot more granular. So it started us moving in the direction of really mapping exactly what we still have where, and looking at what is the fastest way we can get rid of that, if it's possible now, or if it's depending on being able to move to other energy sources or other material solutions.
Thank you, David. And of course, you at Icebug and also IKEA, you're both members of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Johan, how is Exponential Roadmap Initiative working with its members, both on transition plans and then with a focus on fossil fuels?
Yeah, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, we bring together the leading climate impact companies in the world, which are committed to halve emissions by 2030 towards net zero by 2040. And obviously we are absolute supporters of Fossil to Clean and the Fossil Fuel Treaty, and also supporting the acceleration of these campaigns. Specifically up to the Secretary General's summit this summer, we worked with 11 companies under Claire Wigg's expertise to actually assess these transition plans and nominate them to the Secretary General. We are now specifically creating a work stream with IKEA, Icebug and others to specifically focus on phasing out fossil fuels as a next step. We think it's incredibly important, apart from putting pressure on the politicians, to actually show precisely how it should be done, that it's happening, and to send that clear signal to finance and to suppliers.
Thanks, Johan and Andrew of Women Business Coalition. Johan already mentioned there the Fossil to Clean campaign. What are you specifically trying to do with that campaign in terms of bringing that business voice on fossil fuels out?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Exponential Roadmap Initiative is a fantastic partner of ours, and it's really great to be working together. So the We Mean Business Coalition, firstly, maybe just what is it quickly? We are, in fact, an NGO ourselves, working with businesses around the world to drive further action on climate change, really with the most ambitious end of the business community. And we were founded before the Paris Agreement by 7 existing ambitious business organizations, and since then we've really worked to just amplify the message, make sure it's coherent, to really get that ambitious voice in front of policymakers. as well as providing guidance to companies on transition plans and other things. So the big thing that we brought to this COP, as was already mentioned by Johan, is this fossil to clean campaign, which is really about getting the voice of businesses behind fossil fuel phase out and getting policymakers to understand that this is what a big set of businesses are calling for. We think that's very important here in these negotiations because there's a tendency to drive towards clean energy growth and energy efficiency, which is hugely important. And we support the pledge announced and signed by many countries last week for tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency. It's a fantastic effort. But we always insist, and the businesses behind us insist, as we've been hearing just now on the panel, that we absolutely have to keep the focus on fossil fuel phase out as well, in parallel as the other side of the equation, because the data shows just how stubborn fossil fuels are in the economies. The proportion has hovered around 4/5 of primary energy for many decades, and it is slightly falling now, but really not fast enough. So it's about showing governments that businesses are behind this and pushing them for more policy. So this is the theory of change that we have behind our whole coalition. Actually, is called the ambition loop. And it's this notion that if businesses really are ambitious and take action, if we can act to put that evidence of these businesses acting in front of governments and make them hear that message, it counteracts the negative lobbying they hear from incumbents, from fossil fuel companies, and it helps them to have confidence to make better policy, which then drives more companies, which then we can bring more evidence in front of governments, and so on in a positive loop. So this fossil to clean is really a strong example of that ambition loop in action.
Thanks, Andrew. And Ali, of course, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative is all about getting rid of fossil fuels, and your list of endorsements and the organizations that are endorsing this initiative is very wide and large and in all directions. There's faith organizations, there are cities, there is individuals. What's the role of business in your initiative?
Sure, thanks. So just for anyone that doesn't know us, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty was created to address that huge issue in the room that we are finally addressing at this COP, is that our fossil fuel production continues to grow. So we saw just recently with the producer gap report that we are on track by 2030 to produce 130% more fossil fuels than is in line with 1.5. So at the treaty, you're right, our support and our momentum increases every day. It's one of the incredible elements of the treaty is that the support is so diverse and the momentum continues to build. We came to this COP with 8 nations supporting. Halfway through, we're now at 11, and hopefully that will continue to increase. So our work with businesses really has developed over the past year or so. From our initiative launching about 3 years ago, we actually had hundreds of organizations and businesses come forward to back the treaty, but we really wanted to do it in a way that was intentional and meaningful, and really got that sweet spot between action from businesses in terms of the climate transition plans, but also that advocacy need as well, which we're seeing so well at this COP, the loud noises and signals being sent to those decision makers around fossil fuel phase out. So we launched our strategy a few months ago, and we've been working with a lot of leading businesses, including Icebug here, who are one of our early endorsers. And we really work with companies to ensure what they're doing around action on fossil fuels is backing their call to action as well. What we don't want to see, I suppose, is a continuation maybe of the approaches to date that haven't worked. So we heard at this COP that the number of companies that are setting net zero targets continues to increase, but fossil fuel production continues to grow. We hear that the number of net zero companies' targets continue to increase, but lobbying against the policies that will get us there continues to grow. So we have no more time for that. And at the treaty, we want a really strong balance between action and advocacy and not have companies talking at both sides of their mouth on this. So we've had a steady flow of companies and increasing. We've had great interactions with both We Mean Business and ERI as well. And the movement continues to grow. And we're super excited to see that continue to build after this COP.
Thanks, Ali. And Johan, you mentioned this work program to map and eliminate fossil fuels, because the companies that we're bringing together, they have large supply chains, right? They're not themselves in the fossil fuel business, but they have large supply chains with fossil fuels in them. So tell us how this work program aims to support companies in phasing out fossil fuels.
Yeah, we're setting up this work program, which is part of a transition plan program together with some of the leading companies, as we said, with IKEA in the front line, Icebug, and a number of other companies. So it's about, of course, to communicate the commitment to act, and it's about how you actually map your fossil fuels in the value chain. It's about sharing case examples, how it is being done already today, and to communicate that we're actually doing it today. And it is about to share best methods and maybe develop some additional methods, and then to help to scale out that to any other type of company openly. So that is thinking. And it is about, of course, electricity, it's about heating, it's about cooling, it's about steam, it's about fuels, and it's also about materials. So it's all impact, what is impacting the value chain.
And Christina, you at IKEA, you've been very keen to not just engage with the program, but actually get it off the ground. But you've already done some work there on mapping fossil fuels and including taking first steps to get rid of them. What are those? How are you doing that work?
You have to start with mapping, yeah. So you need to know your value chain. We have a very complex value chain, and we are spread all over the world, and we work with all materials. We have the material agenda, the food agenda, we have the transportation, we have the customer travel back and forth to stores or last mile fulfillment. We have the energy use at home, life, end of life, and also even business travel. So we need to know that. So the comprehensive mapping that we did showed us, where are the pain points. And then only then can we, from that insight, we can start to develop the action plans and get the ownership also close to the business where it is. So when we did this, if I share some of the pain points that we saw, was for instance within glue. In IKEA, glue stands for almost 5% of our total climate footprint. So you're thinking glue, what? They don't sell glue. No, but we sell a lot of wooden-based furniture. So in the particle board, for instance, glue is a big component. So here we are now working with substituting the fossil-based glue with bio-based glue. Now we have the first start. This we've been working on for years. This requires technology, innovation, engineering. So now we have that. So we are very happy with this because we can now put in 40% bio-based glue, which takes down the glue content, footprint with 30%. So these are the things you need to do to know where you have the pain points. And I think this is why this program is so important. And if we can share any learnings to others, it's great. I have many other examples too. So if we have time, we can take them later.
Actually, I do want to get to one, that because we know this figure that coal has to go down by 95%, right? So if we talk urgency, coal is the one to tackle with the most urgency. What are your insights on coal?
Yeah, we also found, of course, that we had certain suppliers, and if I look in the production side, who had high CO2.
Hang on just a second. I believe there is an airplane going right over us, so hopefully that will have passed soon.
And hopefully that plane will soon go on cooking oil instead of other fuels.
Thanks.
Yes. So coal, yeah. So of course we then saw that the coal our suppliers use when they have this high temperature processes, for instance. So coal was something we did see when we did this mapping. So we decided that we will focus there. So we put earlier plans for them. So 2025 already, we have set a coal phase out.
Thanks, Christina. And I'd be keen to hear from David, who's undergone the similar process already. When you started mapping fossil fuels in your supply chain for your transition plan work and before, where do you see which fossil fuels?
Yeah, so typically in apparel or footwear, the biggest hotspot is in heat production, where you have these kind of coal-fired boilers, where you do dyeing of textiles and also different kind of wet processing. So our solution to that was to switch to other forms of dyeing, solution dye or top dye, where instead of bathing a big sheet of white textile, you actually put the pigment in on fiber level. So then you don't need any coal-fired boilers. So I think that we have actually doing that and also switching from coal in midsole and outsole production, switching from coal to at least liquid natural gas or biomass. We have eliminated coal in our supply chain. So some of that is from process, where the downside is that you get a lot bigger minimum quantities when you don't do conventional dyeing. and some is also from, you know, just switching what kind of source you burn. So it's not ideal with gas, but it's a lot better than coal. So this is one big part. And then what we see also where we can make a big change is for the electricity production. And that's significantly easier. You can often get to around 50% with solar rooftop.
Now, David, you at Icebug, it's part of your policy to be very open about your sharing your learnings to inspire best practice. How can this work in this kind of work program? What value do you see from collaborating with other companies to develop and share best practice?
Oh, this is immensely valuable. I mean, we're a super small actor. So in the factories where we have initiated that, they go from just using the grid to installing solar. We're between 2 and 20% of their business. So it means that, you know, to get on management mental shortlist of things to look at. If we just ask them for something, they won't even consider it in many cases. But then aligning with other customers in the same factory is very helpful to put it up on the agenda. And then also spreading this kind of vertically out so that there is a knowledge about what you can do, which can be used for other brands, for other factories. So collaboration, I would say, is key.
Thank you, David, and we come there to collaboration, but also to really uniting business to act, and that's of course what the Fossil to Clean campaign is about, but also what the Fossil to Clean principles seek to inform. And I'd just be curious to hear from you, Andrew, how the principles, the Fossil to Clean principles that you launched alongside the campaign, really try to get business to act on phasing out fossil fuels.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to talk about that. And it reminded me actually that what I forgot to say in my introductory remarks is that of course both Icebug and IKEA are proud signatories of our campaign, and despite their difference in scale, they sit next to each other on our alphabetical list of signatories. And beyond that, actually, we have more than 200 companies now signed up, like $1.5 trillion in revenue, and around a dozen of those are Swedish. In fact, so it's a strong representation from Sweden, as perhaps you'd expect, and we're very happy to see that in the list. But indeed, so this campaign, it is about business, but it very much recognizes that fossil fuel phase out in its entirety requires 4 groups of actors: businesses on the demand side, businesses on the supply side, the actual oil and gas coal producers, finance and investors, and then of course governments. So what we did was develop a set of principles for each of these group of actors that really align with the science, align with the IEA's net zero by 2050 scenario for the energy sector, and really plot what, in big high picture terms, what each of those groups of actors need to do to get there if they're really committed to this initiative. So while our campaign has been about demand side companies so far, those principles are out there. We encourage supply side companies to join. None have yet, of course, but over time we hope this is going to build as a demand signal that will become unavoidable, and one by one the more progressive of the supply side companies who really want to transition may want to sign up, and we're actually seeing some of the kind of midstream refining companies already talking to us. So it's quite exciting that that's moving in that direction. And then of course governments. So on the government side, here at COP, of course, we're using this campaign to push very strongly for fossil fuel phase out in the negotiations, in the global stocktake. And we were actually a big part of the letter you mentioned, Andrea, that went out yesterday with these 1,000 signatories, that we were pushing that from the business side. So for governments, it's about really setting clear timelines and targets for the phase out of production of fossil fuels within the country in line with the 1.5 degrees. It's about making sure the power sector is fastest in decarbonizing, given the importance of that, as we just heard, for companies, and with the goal of decarbonized power by 2035 in developed countries and 2040 in developing countries. It's about ensuring that it's backed up with north-south support, so the developed countries really supporting countries in the global south with their transition. And then about the whole set of policies to ensure coherent price signals, removing fossil fuel subsidies, reorienting those subsidies, using carbon pricing where appropriate, and so on. So that's an example of the principles we're putting on governments. And then on the demand side, just quickly, fitting with what we've been hearing from companies about their own transition plans, we call for them to, well, firstly, to sign up, they have to have adopted a science-based target or signed up to the Race to Zero commitment. So that already there's a benchmark to cross to be part of it. Then there's a commitment to phase out the unabated fossil fuels in operations by 2040. To really have a credible transition plan that has both the phase out of fossil fuels, which is why this mapping initiative and the work with Exponential roadmap is going to be so important to help companies with that. And then also a phasing in of clean energy is the two parts of the transition plan. And then, of course, the element of engaging with suppliers. It's all very well to talk about operations, but so many companies have, vast majority of their emissions are in their supply chain. And while it was too much to expect companies to commit to this campaign to phase out the whole of Scope 3, their suppliers, because they just don't have the agency yet, there is an engagement within the principles to identify all the important tier 1 suppliers, so those suppliers that companies have a direct relationship with, and get them to engage on 2030 targets, get them to sign up to science-based targets, and to then set a cascade up the supply chain.
Thanks, Andrew. And of course, you mentioned the negotiations, and I'm assuming, Ali, that you and your organization will be following these negotiations very, very closely, in particular, of course, with the language on fossil fuel phase-out. And when we now consider that the demand signals that Andrew mentioned, that will take a while, right? Until the companies here have actually managed to not just map, but also actually eliminate fossil fuels, which then will lead to that reduced demand signal, and then that will be hopefully at a point not too far in the future at scale. But given that sort of delay, what can business do now? And how important is the business voice now to influence the outcome of this COP?
Thanks a million. Yeah, I mean, I think it is very clear that fossil fuels are the issue for this COP and will also be the litmus test for this COP in terms of how successful or not. And the fact that fossil fuels is the issue is quite astounding in itself. And I think it really speaks to the movement that have been calling for fossil fuel phase out for decades. And finally, it's being heard. And right now, we need that noise and that call for action to be as diverse and to be as loud as possible, including business. So we're seeing some signs of intention around fossil fuels in the different drafts of the text. The fact that phase out is in there. The fact that, yes, renewables is mentioned, but now linked to the fact that it's renewables that will displace fossil fuels. But there's big risks as well in these last few days. That phase out gets taken out completely. That unabated goes in with no definition and opens up a huge amount of delaying tactics that we've seen before, and that equity is not at the core of how fossil fuel phase-out is referenced. So right now, it is all elbows to the wheel in terms of keeping phase-out high on the agenda, keeping that diversity of voice, and keeping the alignment in terms of not only getting phase-out, but the version of phase-out that's in the text as well.
And there'd be so many more questions that we could dive into when it comes to equity, when it comes to global north and global south, and how this can, how both multinational companies phasing out fossil fuels from their supply chains positively or negatively impacts suppliers in the global south, and what all has to be taken into consideration. But I'm afraid we don't have time to go into this quite yet at this event. I would be interested to know from David maybe, how does any outcome of COP matter to you with regard to phasing out fossil fuels?
I mean, regardless what happens, we will continue to do our very best. But of course, it will be a lot easier if more people get on the same journey. And I'd just like to say that I thought it was really inspiring to hear Excel from the Seychelles before, because it's been a while since I heard somebody talk about, being a leader and being at the forefront. It's been like a race to who can drag their feet slowest these last couple of, months now. So I think it would, of course, be great if we can get a big signal that we want to push this transition. If we don't get this, it means that businesses will need to push even harder.
Christina, your views?
Oh, it's very similar as to what you share here from Icebag. And by the way, very honored to be next in line with Icebag on that list, Andrew, so very humbled. So I think it doesn't stop us. We need to do this anyhow. And it's, as David, yeah, now I said is saying here that what we need to do is even more clear. Because the dilemmas, the problems are out there. They won't vanish regardless of the outcome of the COP, but it will make it a little bit more difficult. Of course, governments need to take their responsibilities and also support, specifically when it comes to, for instance, renewable energy from the grid and so on. So we are still hope. We always say we will choose hope instead of despair, because only then we can actually do something and go forward. So we do still have hopes. The COP is not over yet. But we will continue. We stay firm with our goals and targets and our actions.
Thank you, Christina. May I just ask you to pass the microphone to Johan. Johan, whatever this COP comes out on fossil fuels, have it in, have it out, anything in between. How does it matter to the work of Exponential Roadmap Initiative?
Well, independent of the text, we need to ensure that this COP is a start of the absolute phase-out of fossil fuels. Independent of the text, we're absolutely committed from our perspective, and we need to mobilize, of course, all the companies we can to put even much higher pressure on the government. So that's number one. But number two, as we talked about this work program, we need to develop the best practices, how to phase out fossil fuels, show that it's happening, and send a clear signal to finance. Don't build up stranded assets. They will be stranded for sure to suppliers. If you should be part of the future supply chains, you have to act immediately. So this is incredibly important. So that is basically our own call to action.
So we'll map and eliminate fossil fuels with our member companies, and we'll take the action regardless of the policy signal. Andrew, what about We Mean Business Coalition?
Yeah, thank you. So I think in terms of the COP outcome, I've been involved with these COPs with various hats on for about 15 years, and they're infuriatingly incremental given the rapid transformational change that we all know that we need. Whoops. But we have to live with that, and so the game, whatever the language lands on here, it's really about increasing the pressure, as others have said, going forward. So our campaign was really designed as a multi-year campaign to keep building. This question of unabated is, it's a good chance that ends up in the text, and therefore it's all about definitions and guardrails. And we actually developed, for our campaign, we've developed a much more detailed definition. Really, what does this mean in different circumstances, different sectors, different parts of fossil fuel use and production? So we'll feed that into the process should that become necessary. Because it actually surprised us. The definitions out there currently are really not really fit for purpose. The IPCC has one, the IEA has one, but they don't really cover everything. They're not very clear. So we had to include the word unabated in our campaign for legal reasons in the United States, to get companies to sign up without being challenged in courts in Republican states. It's a long story, but there's a very particular legal reason for that. Therefore, we're not afraid of that term. It's just about being absolutely sure how it's defined, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and where the use of carbon capture and storage is in certain hard-to-abate sectors and so on. So the game will be continue to build the pressure, as others have said, really that demand signal, suppliers when they come in, investors as much as possible, has to just keep building, and then in very tight definitions and whatever the qualifiers are that get into the text, we have to be absolutely vigilant to push the tight definitions. It may be unabated, it may be like responsible transition, it may be words around equity, which are very important, but then can be misused. So it's about really keeping vigilant on that.
And you opened up a whole new can of worms on the unabated there. I'm not going to ask you for a brief definition, because even that can take a little while. Ali, on how the outcome of this COP matters to you and your work and your organization's work. Just briefly, thanks.
Yeah, as I said, we're in new ground in terms of what's possible in the next few days. But I also think it's important to note that phase out our fossil fuels are not in the text. We still need a plan about how we're going to do that, and that's what's missing. And that is a core issue the Fossil Fuel Treaty is trying to address, to get us a legal binding mechanism about how we phase out fossil fuels, which very much touches on the equity issue, that it won't be every country on the same timeline, that will take into account historical issues, ability to transition, and those who need the most support. So this could be the beginning of what that plan might look like, and finally get us on the right trajectory. And we've every hope, I suppose, that we get a strong mention and we finally start that journey towards getting off fossil fuels and keeping us all in a safe zone. And if I can just say, in terms of the company side of things again, you don't have a climate plan if it's not based on absolute fossil fuel phase out. So if you've made the commitments and you want the credibility, it is time to call for an absolute fossil fuel phase out.
Thanks, Ali. And my original idea was to end on having all of you do a call to action here to whoever really on fossil fuel phase out. But I'm afraid we'll have to skip that. And I think that we have heard this call to action quite clearly. On one hand, yes, policy makers, we do need that clear signal. But on the other hand, also a very clear call really to ourselves that this commitment is there from business, and it's now about putting the fossil fuel phase out into action from businesses that really center their transition planning around fossil fuels. So thank you very much for coming, for engaging in this discussion. Christina Niemöller-Ström of Inter-IKEA Group, Johan Falk, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Andrew Prague, We Mean Business Coalition, and Ali Sheridan of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Thank you all for joining.